Federal Fag and Alex Reynolds Mystery Series Book 2. Author Fred Hunter, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1998. Narrator Eric Ost. For Raymond Dragon. Chapter 8. Mother was quite displeased when she arrived for breakfast the next morning and found us still in bed. She was even more displeased about our condition. Peter and I was bruised pretty badly, but fortunately had not required a lot of bandaging. There were a couple of miraculously minor scrapes on Peter's right arm, and there was a gash on my knee where I'd hit the brake pedal when I slipped off the seat and onto the floor as we tumbled. But the real reason for our exhaustion was that we'd spent several hours afterward explaining to the police and the rental car company that the car had gone out of control when we had a blowout. That was the simple explanation, and it got us out of there more quickly than we would have if we'd reported to them what we really thought, that someone had shot the tire out. And what could we have told them? Only that it was done by someone in a car we couldn't identify, and we hadn't even seen the direction in which our pursuer had gone. The ramifications would have had us with the police for the remainder of the night. And simplifying the explanation had also gotten the rental company to replace the car with a lot less trouble, as one could expect. They were not exactly pleased with the condition of the car, which would never work for them again. But the blowout explanation had some rather serious negligence implications that the company was eager to quash. Before they even got started, we were supplied a teal blue Chevy Lumina that had more miles on it than any rental I've ever used. I got the feeling that the company was a little reluctant to allow someone who'd totaled one of their cars have a brand new one, no matter what the reason for the accident. "This is getting too dangerous for us, Lovey," said Mother, as we had croissants on the balcony. Even in our bruised, battered, and generally nerve-wracked condition, we weren't about to set aside the niceties. "We should let the police handle it." "There's two things wrong with that," I said, washing some of the flaky pastry down with iced tea. "One is that the police aren't handling the murder. As far as I know, they gave me every impression that they were going to blow it off." "And the second?" "We set up a meeting with Brett Lover for 10 o'clock this morning. We have no way of canceling, so instead of standing him up, which is definitely contrary to the way you raised me — I really do hate it when you throw that up at me — so instead of standing him up, we might as well keep the appointment and see what we can see. And there's one other thing. I think the events of last night prove we're onto something." Mother sighed and turned to Peter as if under the circumstances she wasn't above trying to divide and conquer. "Do you agree with him?" "I really don't like it when somebody tries to kill me," Peter said. He raised a steaming cup of coffee to his mouth. "I would find that a lot funnier, darling, if I weren't so worried. Did you make any progress at the apartment building?" "Oh, yes," Mother replied with a sly smile. "I spent my time yesterday at least, while there was still light, doing window boxes." Both Peter and I stopped in the act of stuffing our respective faces. "What?" we said in unison. "Window boxes. I always think that a house isn't a home without window boxes." "You were supposed to be trying to find things out." She gave me a mock, disparaging glance and said, "Oh, how little faith you have in me. I was working on window boxes on the walkway. I was out there all afternoon, so I got to speak to all of my neighbors." Peter smiled. "Jean, only you would have thought of gardening as detection." "And just as I thought, the murder was the talk of the building. Everyone was all abuzz about it. There's a young woman lives next door to me who said she's moving out the minute her lease is up. She doesn't think she'll get another moment's sleep as long as she lives there. Poor dear. There's an older gentleman lives below me, and we had quite a long conversation about safety and such over the railing. I was leaning over the railing, talking to him, while he looked up at me from the garden. Like the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet, I said with sun-like snideness. Don't be daft, darling, she replied, then took another sip of her tea. Anyway, I didn't get anything in the way of useful information from them because they said they never really got to know Patrick, and what little they knew they didn't like. They seemed to think he was a prig. What? Said Peter, choking on his coffee. A prig, dear. Whatever did you think I said? Nothing, Peter replied with an embarrassing smile as he wiped the coffee from his chin. So you didn't find out anything? I asked. Oh, don't be too sure about that, Mother said slyly. There's more than 2 other residents, you know, but I'll admit I didn't get much of anything until Mr. Watkins came home from work. Mr. Watkins? Reg Watkins. He's a very nice young gentleman who lives 2 doors down from me. He dresses very well, and he's very polite. So was Crippen, by all accounts. What did he tell you? Peter asked. That I wasn't arranging the flowers properly. He gave me the name of a good greenhouse where I might get flats of petunias. He said he always thought petunias looked nice in window boxes. I heaved an exaggerated sigh. There are times when I'm really not sure whether or not Mother's pulling my leg, I said. About Patrick, Mother? She looked confused for a moment and then said, Oh, yes. He was quite disturbed about the murder, as was everyone else in the building, but he had a different reason. This piqued my interest. What was it? Mr. Watkins is gay, dear, and he's sure that the murder was a gay thing. That was why Patrick was murdered. Peter clucked his tongue and sat back in his chair. Oh, great. There's something we hadn't thought of. Gay paranoia. Wait a minute, I said. How did he know Pat was gay? Did he have something to do with him? Mother smiled knowingly. That's exactly what I asked him. I mean, how he knew. As it turns out, Mr. Watkins didn't know Patrick personally, though I gather it wasn't for wanting of trying. No, he knew about Patrick's work. Ah, I see. No. I don't mean that he's seen Patrick's videos. I mean he was assuming about what Patrick did for a living. Why on earth would he assume that Patrick had something to do with porn? Asked Peter. Because of one of his visitors, Mother replied triumphantly. Her face told us that she'd gotten the reaction she'd hoped for. Peter and I both raised our eyebrows, and Peter added a, Who was his visitor? Someone Watkins recognized? Yes, someone named Sid Wishes, which I assume is a stage name. I can't imagine anyone really having that for a name. Oh, yeah, Sid Williams, I said. Mother and Peter each turned to me with different degrees of surprise. I shrugged. Once having made the slip, there was no use denying it. I've seen him before. I mean his videos. I turned to Peter and added, Before I met you. Peter said, Pretty soon I'll be looking for a job where I don't have to work any evenings. You need a nanny. Before I met you, I emphasized. Never mind. I turned to Mother, hoping to change the subject quickly, and said, So, this Watkins recognized Sid's wishes? Oh, yes, he was quite sure about it. And Watkins told you all this while you were out there potting plants? God, Mother, I've underestimated your abilities. Yes, he did. Poor thing. I get the impression that Mr. Watkins is lonely. He hasn't had any visitors since I've been here. That hasn't been that long. I know, but he sounded just like a lost puppy when he told me Patrick hadn't been very friendly. It's very sad that maybe the 2 of you could try to fix him up with someone while we're out here. Mother, the only person we know out here is dead. She shrugged and said, Well, yes, there's that. Well, said Peter, you really have been keeping your eyes open, haven't you? She shrugged. It's what I was told to do. That's another thing that's bothering me, I said. Good old Agent Larry Nelson, our man in Washington. Why the hell did he tell you to do that? I don't know. But I did put a call in into him yesterday to tell him about the murder, in which he was supremely uninterested. Or at least that's the way he seemed. With him, it's hard to tell, and I also asked him to find out what he could about Man Productions. What did he say? Nothing yet. He said he'd see if they had anything, but... Yes, I prodded her impatiently. Nothing, she said, shaking her head. It's just that he sounded so damned evasive about the whole thing. That's how Nelson sounds about everything, I said. Mother thought for a moment, making a smacking sound with her lips. At any rate, I'm sure they'll come up with something. They probably will, said Peter sardonically. I'll bet they keep quite a file on all these things gay, especially successful gay enterprises. Do you really think they're that successful? Said Mother. I answered her. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot of money in it. Look at how many video stores there are in the country, all with gay customers who are always looking for some new fun. Not all of them, Peter said with a sly smile. The implication wasn't lost on me. I blushed. So what do we do now? Said Mother. I glanced at the clock and on the nightstand and said, well, right now I think we'd better go and see what Brett Lover can tell us. Last night I got the feeling that he knew more about Patrick than he was willing to tell us. For free, you mean? Said Peter as we rose from the table. Oh, yeah. That reminds me, Mother, do you have $100? There was a fair amount of bustle along the extensive length of Santa Monica Pier, although this early in the day the famed merry-go-round lay dormant in its roundhouse. I peered in the windows, and the darkness inside made the motionless horses loom ominously in their circle, as if a sudden burst of power might send them rampaging through the countryside. The three of us walked almost to the end of the pier, along which men of assorted races stood fishing just before the arch, or pavilion, or whatever they call it, were a bunch of benches facing various directions. Peter sat beside me on one facing east toward the entrance to the pier. This would give us a good enough view to see Lover approaching, and since directly behind the bench was a railing and a straight drop into the ocean, we could be fairly certain that nobody would be able to cross behind us and listen unnoticed, although at this point we had no way of knowing why anyone would want to do that. Mother took a seat on a bench catty-corner to ours, facing north. The sky was hazy with smog, and the sun was trying to eat its way through, which put the light at that irritating level where it's too bright for the naked eye and too dark for sunglasses. There was quite a bit of activity around the various ramshackle shops, some just opening and some in full swing, apparently catering to tourists who had not yet adjusted to Pacific Standard Time. Since there didn't appear to be anything about the shops that would interest the fishermen, whom I took to be the only locals who would be out there at 10 in the morning, there were more than enough customers along the pier to make being open at that hour worth the shopkeeper's while. In fact, the number of people strolling around made me feel both safer and more apprehensive. Safe because there's safety in numbers. Apprehensive because it was extremely difficult to keep track of who was around. As Mother had pointed out earlier, whatever we'd happened into out here had become quite a bit more dangerous, and I would have felt a lot better about this meeting if I could be sure it was unobserved. I glanced at the watch that I normally wear on trips. He's late. How late? Said Peter. 7 minutes so far. Peter snorted. That's hardly late. I'm sure people like Brett Lover have a different way of telling time. Like 10 o'clock means whenever the hell he happens to get out of bed and haul himself there. If he shows up at all. You have to be patient, the both of you, Mother interjected. He'll probably be here. 7 minutes isn't even fashionably late. We sat quietly for a couple of minutes, and I said, You know, I just thought of something. It's just possible that Lover had something to do with that accident of ours last night. How do you figure that? Well, think of it. Remember, we didn't want to go around asking people if they'd known Patrick because we didn't want to draw attention to ourselves. Lover was the only one we talked to directly about it. So, if he thought we were looking into Patrick's murder and he had something to do with it, he might have tried to get rid of us. I don't know, sweetheart, said Peter, shaking his head. I didn't get the impression that Lover could see past his own reflection. I pressed on, warming to the ideal and disliking its implications at the same time. But if he did have something to do with it, then that means it's not exactly bright for us to be meeting him like this, said Mother, her voice taking on the slightly Cockney accent she tends toward when she wants to make a point. No, said Peter, laying a calming hand on her knee. This would be exactly what we should do. If he thought we were killed last night, he won't show up, so I wouldn't worry about it. Whoever chased us didn't wait around to make sure we were dead. He might show up just to be certain. Which would still make this the place to be, Peter explained. If he's involved, we need to talk to him. And if he wasn't involved, we still need to talk to him about Patrick, which is why we wanted to meet him in the first place. This is a very public place. Nobody would try anything here. Both Mother and I turned away from him and sighed. There didn't seem to be any way to logically disagree with him, especially since he was right. People continued to amble past us, a couple wearing identical shirts with broad blue and yellow stripes, as if they were afraid they'd get separated in a crowd and wanted to be easy to spot. A blond boy who looked much too young to be out there alone rode by on a small red bike, and several other people, both singly and in pairs, who had that look that tourists get when they visit a place that's supposed to be famous and can't figure out what all the fuss is about. The combination of the haze, the plaintive cries of gulls, and the meandering quality of the passers-by made the whole scene seem forbidding to me. It took on a feeling of uncertainty, like everything had gone silent and everyone was moving in slow motion through waves of heat. It was almost 20 after 10 when I looked way down toward the entrance to the pier and thought I could just make out Brett Lover coming down the ramp, along with a fresh flock of tourists. Most of the little shops had gone into full swing. The people were gazing at racks of picture postcards holding t-shirts and sweatshirts up to their chest to see if they liked the size and the design, and bells, whistles, and shouts rang out from a dark, cavernous video arcade not far from where we were sitting. There was much more activity than I was comfortable with. By the time the man reached the bottom of the ramp, I knew it was Lover. He strutted with that I am the king of all I survey attitude that he demonstrated so clearly last night. There he is, I said, nodding in his direction. Peter looked toward the entrance, spotted Lover, and smiled. I am the master of my soul, he said sardonically. Which one is he? Said Mother. The Popinjay, I replied. Peter replied a little more fully. Walking down the center of the pier, muted yellow pants, floral shirt. Lover continued to swagger his way towards us, looking from side to side, checking out the benches for us and checking out the men who passed by. Or I should say, letting the men check him out in the light of day. He looked less exotic, but no less attractive. His tan was a lot more evident, and his hair more blonde. Unlike last night, it was fetchingly tousled as if it were being done by a wind machine on an MGM soundstage. He looked preppy and innocent, which I'm sure got him a lot of work in porn. When he was about 200 feet away, he spotted us, and a smug smile spread across his face. I really didn't like that smile. It had the look of sexual superiority of someone who always winds up on top, both in the bedroom and out of it. He looked like he fucked people for a living in more ways than one. He turned in our direction at a leisurely pace, happy to be late and happy to make us wait even a little bit longer. When he was about 20 feet from us, he opened his mouth as if he were about to say something, then suddenly his head jerked forward so fast that his chin bounced against his chest and back again, and a split second later, his chest thrust forward as if someone had punched him in the back. To say the least, I was startled and my mind suddenly flashed to Alien when the creature pops out of John Hurt. But there was no such obvious evidence of what had caused the obscene spasm. Lover's legs buckled and he fell to his knees. His torso swayed a moment in a sickly circular motion, and he finally fell backward and to the side. "Oh, my lord," said Mother in a whisper as she stared saucer-eyed at Lover. Her words sounded quietly in the dead silence just before pandemonium broke out on the pier. The crowd scrambled wildly in all directions at once, people running into each other, slamming together and falling and recovering and running in other directions. I ran to Lover with Mother and Peter right behind me. As I started to kneel beside him, I noticed the blood for the first time. I looked up at Peter and said frantically, "Go, quick! See if you can find him!" Peter looked at me quizzically for a moment, then realized that what I meant was that we needed to see if he could find anyone on the pier that he recognized. He nodded at me and took off toward the entrance. Of course, in my panic, I didn't realize that it would be a futile effort to try to find anyone in this stampeding crowd. Gurgling noises came from Lover's throat as I cradled his head in my lap. Mother pulled his legs from beneath him in an attempt to straighten him out and make him more comfortable. I stroked his hair and noticed with a guilty pang that the smile, to which I'd been mentally objecting just a few moments earlier, had gone. I felt the back of his head and my stomach lurched when my fingers found a gash that I seemed to be a bullet hole. Then I ran my hand below his shoulders and found another just about in the middle of his back. "Oh, Jesus God, he's been shot," I said, stating the obvious. Lover let out a loud humming sound as if he were trying to shout himself awake from the middle of a nightmare and couldn't get his mouth to work. And then there was a spasm that caused his back to arch in a manner that was painful to watch. He slowly relaxed and straightened. Then his head dropped sideways and a stream of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. "He's dead," said Mother quietly. Then we heard the sirens. In the course of the first CIA case into which I stumbled, I saw one man shot through the head and another fall off the top of the Sears Tower. But in both cases it happened to someone who was in the process of trying to kill me. It was something quite different to see someone shot who was merely trying to talk to me. Someone whose worst sin, as far as I knew, was attempting to extort a little money in exchange for information. It was something really different, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by it. The last thing I needed at that moment was to be grilled by the police. Unfortunately, the police are a lot less sympathetic the second time you turn up with a dead body on your hands. So when Mother and I found ourselves back at police headquarters, Detective Rob Furness was not amused. This time, we weren't offered coffee, and we weren't given the luxury of a casual conversation with him and his partner, Detective Howard Hempel, who had taken Mother's statement the first time. In the squad room, we were taken to an interrogation room, a bleak little place with a hardwood table and half a dozen hard, straight-backed chairs. Peter escaped this because he hadn't returned to the scene by the time the police took us away. Furness looked at Mother and said, "So, Miss Robbins, was it? Are you going to offer an alibi for Reynolds here? You seem to pop up pretty conveniently by his side." Mother stared at him for a moment, deciding how to proceed, but before she could, Furness continued. "I know. You just happened to be strolling on the pier this morning and just happened to see this guy get shot. And you just happened to be able to swear that Reynolds here didn't have nothing to do with it." Mother sighed, getting impatient with the monologue. "Mr. Furness, as it happens," said Furness, mimicking her. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of making me angry, but I could see it was going to be hard. He continued, "You should probably proceed with caution. I don't know what kind of game the two of you are playing, but this is where it ends. You're sure not going to tell me it was a coincidence that you were there at the same time. Were you about to give me another cock and bull story about how you don't know Reynolds here?" "As it happens," said Mother with pointed primness, "Alex is my son." "Your son," said Furness flatly. He sounded as if he'd been prepared to fiend shock no matter what my mother said. Unfortunately for him, he actually did look surprised. "Yes, he's my son." "So is your name Robbins?" Furness said to me. Mother got that look that I imagine anyone would have who suddenly felt that every untruth they'd ever told was about to come out. "No," she said apologetically. "My name is Jean Reynolds." "So what were you doing living in the same building as one of the victims under an assumed name, no less?" Mother looked down at the floor, and I could feel for her. It was hard enough to explain it to me. I can't imagine how she'd explain it to the police. She could possibly offer a reasonable explanation for why she'd come out to L.A. to see Patrick, but it would be much more difficult to explain how she'd managed to be in the same apartment building without bringing Agent Nelson into the picture. And under the present circumstances, I doubted the police would believe her if she explained that she was using an assumed name as a lark. "It's a little difficult. It's a personal matter." "You think so, huh?" said Furness with disgust. "Well, we'll see about that, and we'll get back to you in a minute. But, Detective Furness, everything else I told you when we were here before was true." "Was it?" "Alex was not at Patrick Gleason's apartment before he was killed. He really did arrive and discover the body, and he really wasn't in the apartment long enough to have done it himself." "And this Brett Lover guy?" "We told you what happened. We told you that he was killed in front of us and that we didn't see who did it. There must have been 100 other people there who could tell you the same thing. Unfortunately, nobody was paying enough attention. The only people we got hold of said that all they saw was that Lover got shot as he was approaching your son." I got the impression he was emphasizing the words, not so much to implicate me in the murder as to remind my mother that because of her previous lies, he didn't exactly feel the need to trust her. "I can tell you that Alex didn't have anything to do with this young man's shooting, but..." And there we have another one of those coincidences. This young man just happened to be another porn star. Furness turned his deceptively lazy-looking green eyes on me and said, "Tell me something, Reynolds. You ever heard of Jack the Ripper?" "What?" "Jack the Ripper. You've heard of him, haven't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. I had an awful feeling about which way this was going to go. "So what have you got against these porn guys? You think they give you people a bad name?" "If by you people you mean gays, then no, I don't think that guys who appear in porn give gays a bad name. Any more than breeders who appear in porn give breeders a bad name. I choose that particular pejorative for straight people to get back at them, and because it was the only way I could think of. That's the trouble with living in a predominantly straight world. The majority tends to keep itself from being labeled." But the word did have an effect on Furness. He looked affronted and surprised, as if the idea that there might be derogatory terms for straight people had never occurred to him. But I doubted it had the same effect by calling someone a faggot. Furness decided to try again. "So what do you have against these guys that fuck for money?" "I don't have anything against them." "You're religious, man?" "No," I said with more contempt than I'd intended. I had nothing against religion, just religion in the way I took him to mean it at that moment. It was proof that you could turn any word into a pejorative. "You sure? You know those guys in those videos, they're sitting against God, aren't they?" "I would think that if they're hurting anyone, they're only hurting themselves." Mother cut in. "That's why I came out here and why Alex got in touch with Patrick in the first place. Alex was surprised to find out that Patrick was doing those types of videos, so he wanted to try and talk to him about it." I'm sure Mother thought she was helping me when she said that, but Furness's face beamed with triumph. "So you do think there's something wrong with those porn guys, huh?" "Oh, come on, Detective. I don't think it's a healthy lifestyle, and neither do you. You said as much earlier. You can't make anything out of that." "Tell me something," said Furness, leaning in toward me with a smarmy smile spread across his face. "How did you learn that your old friend was making dirty movies?" You know, it was at that moment I realized that renting that goddamn tape was a special social foxpaws from which I would never recover. "I saw him," I said. "So you watch porn, do you?" His smile was even more triumphant. "Lots of people do things they're not proud of. You can't make anything of that either." Furness's look of triumph turned to barely controlled anger. I'll tell you what I can make something out of. The fact that I found you with 2 dead faggots and the alibi you have for the murder of Patrick Gleason is your mother, who is living in the building under an assumed name. You know, when he put it that way, I really did look like the son of Ma Barker. Mother tried again, and the minute she opened her mouth, I really wished that she would close it, because I had a feeling that anything she said was going to make things worse. Detective, you know that Alex didn't have anything to do with Patrick's murder. You're experienced enough to know that Patrick had been dead a long time before we called you. Furness just shrugged. So you were smart. So you waited a while after you killed him before you called us. You don't believe that? Furness barreled in on her. So why did you come out here, Mrs. Reynolds? Did your son go berserk when he saw his friend in the video? He started talking about killing him. Maybe you came out here because you wanted to stop him. Oh, don't be idiotic, Mother said dismissively. Furness smirked at her quaintness in a way that made me long to use a cudgel on him. Well, how about this? Maybe you want to warn Gleason, and he didn't believe you. I came out here for the reason I stated, nothing more. I'm sure she wondered, as I did, whether or not Furness was going to pursue the matter of her lodgings, but before he could, there was a knock on the door. Hempel opened it. Someone whispered something to him, and he in turn whispered something to Furness. Furness looked irritated, said, I'll be right back, and left the room. He was gone several minutes, during which Hempel sat quietly by the door. Neither Mother nor I was dumb enough to discuss what was going on with Hempel in the room. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't have discussed things even if he wasn't in the room. I'd seen enough movies with bugged interrogation rooms or two-way glass. The one thing Mother did do was ask how I was. I'm all right, I replied, feeling really tired now that I had a moment to think about it. I'm all right. Then I looked at Hempel, who was giving every indication of not listening, though we knew he couldn't help but hear us. I added loudly, but it's not easy to see somebody shot, and now we have to sit here like idiots answering these stupid questions. Now, Alex, said Mother, who then glanced at Hempel and stopped whatever she was going to say. I had the feeling that she'd been about to remark upon the fact that the police couldn't help but grill us, given the compromising positions in which we'd found ourselves during the past couple of days. At least, that's what I was thinking myself. After an endless wait, during which Hempel tried very hard not to show that he was getting impatient, Furness walked briskly back into the room, looking cowed and irritated. He stood at the head of the table and looked both of us in the eye, and in turn, You're free to go. Mother and I, and even Hempel, said, What? At that same time, You heard me. You're free to go. There's someone waiting outside for you. Who? Go on, he said, waving his hand testily in the direction of the door. Mother and I glanced at each other, then rose slowly from the table, almost as if we were expecting a trick of some kind. Then we reached the door. Furness shot his arm across it and blocked our way. He narrowed his eyes and said, But I'll tell you something. You better not even think of leaving this town without telling me. You got that? He looked at me as if he were sure that I thought I was getting away with something. A knowing smile spread over his face, and his eyes got even more narrow. I'm not a fool, Reynolds. Even Jack the Ripper had friends in high places. He dropped his arms and stepped out of the way. We walked past him and out into the squad room, standing in the middle of the room, in his Marmonesque blue suit, looking as if he thought his overly dignified demeanor might be permanently soiled by bringing it to a lowly police station, was Agent Lawrence Nelson. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.